The figure explains which SAP Business Warehouse or BW source system types support delta management. Delta management implies the ability to extract only new or changed data records to the SAP BW system in a separate data request. Technically, this means requesting a delta update for a data source. See the detailed explanations under Update mode. The table marked DQ or Delta Q indicates the source system used by the Delta Q to temporarily store new or changed data records. This is explained in more detail in the figure. However, in some instances, it is possible to transfer only new or changed data records to the SAP BW system with data sources that are not capable of providing delta figures. To do this, specify certain selection conditions in the data request. This is not a delta request as such and is therefore dealt with in the concluding lesson, Additional Features of Delta Data Acquisition. The following list provides additional notes on several source systems, details of which can be found in the respective units of this course. SAP BW Source System. The Delta Q is not used to transfer data between SAP BW systems if data mart scenarios are used. To implement generic data sources capable of providing delta figures on the SAP BW system, use the Delta Q for the corresponding SAP BW source system. SAP System. Not all SAP BW content data sources are capable of providing delta figures. Generic data sources you have created yourself are not automatically capable of providing delta figures, but can include a delta process with the help of the maintenance transaction for generic data sources. However, certain preconditions are necessary in the underlying data source. See the corresponding lesson examples from applications and source systems within this unit. External systems, that is third-party extract, transfer and load or ETL tools connected to SAP BW by means of Business Application Programming Interfaces or BAPIs. The BAPI interface for connecting third-party tools for data acquisition enables the delta update mode to be passed on to a third-party data extraction tool. However, the extent to which this delta request can be adapted or implemented in the partner extraction tool depends on the respective third-party tool. Further details lie beyond the scope of this unit. Delta functionalities of operational data provisioning or ODP, including SAP Landscape Transformation, will be covered in units to follow.
The Delta Q is a Service API or SAPI function. This is the central interface technology used to extract data from SAP source systems to an SAP BW system. Consequently, the Delta Q is only used in SAP or SAP BW source systems. The Delta Q is a data store for new or changed data records for a data source that have occurred since the last data request. The new or changed data records are either written to the Delta Q automatically using an update process in the source system or by means of the data source extractor when a data request is received from the SAP BW system. Details will be provided later. The central tasks of the Data Queue are as follows. It acts as a storage area for new and changed data that has appeared since the last Delta request in the source system that will be transferred to the SAP BW system with the next Delta request. It repeats the previous Delta request to do the following. The Delta Queue always contains the current data to be transferred to SAP BW with the next Delta request, as well as data from previous Delta requests. This is necessary so that Delta data records can be retransferred from the source system if an error occurs during the transfer. It provides an independent Delta supply for several SAP BW target systems to do the following. A separate Delta queue for a data source in an SAP source system, equal to logical system name equal to client in an SAP source system, is held for each target SAP BW system. This enables Delta data records for this data source to be requested by different SAP BW target systems independent of one another.
The Delta queue with transaction data and master data features the following.
In the SAP source system, RSA7 is the central transaction for displaying the Delta queue for a data source.
If you want to implement a Delta process, the three fundamental questions in the figure need to be asked.
The figures describe how you examine a data source to ascertain whether or not it can provide delta figures and how you determine the delta process. The delta process is a property of the extractor that tells you how data will be transferred. As an attribute of the data source, it indicates how the data in the data source will be transferred to the data target. This enables you, for example, to derive the data targets for which a data source is suitable, how to update them, and how the serialization has been done. The type of delta process influences how data is updated to a data target. Serialization is necessary for updating to a data store object or DSO, as overwriting is supported too. Depending on the delta process, the system decides whether serialization is necessary per request or per data package.
The following is a list of the various Delta processes for SAP source systems, that is R3, B2B, Customer Relationship Management or CRM, and so on. When data sources are replicated in an SAP BW system, the metadata of the data source is stored in one of the two tables, either RSOLT PSOURCE for data sources 3.x or RSDS for data sources. In the table ROOSOURCE, you can check how the data is extracted using the data source. The view shows only a small number of the fields in the table. In the Delta column, you will find the Delta process that is used. If the field is filled, the Delta source has a Delta process. The properties of the Delta processes found there are explained later in this unit. In the extraction method column, you will find the method by which the data is extracted from the source system as follows. F1. Function module with its own packaging. V. Using view. Q. Infoset query. Furthermore, you can find out which extractors and extraction structures are used to extract the data.
The update mode in the info package determines the data that is requested. The update modes are as follows. The following process occurs with an initialization run. The delta initialization selection for the data source is saved. All the data that corresponds to the selection criteria determined in the info package is requested, similar to the full update. With the green request status, the delta queue for the data source is generated in the source system. If a delta queue for the data source is generated in the source system, an empty storage area is created for new or changed, that is, delta data records for a data source.
The initialization selections are copied automatically for subsequent delta updates. No other sections can be specified in the delta update. When you delete all the initialization selections for the data source, you simultaneously delete the delta queue for the data source in the source system.
If you carry out an early delta initialization, the process is as follows. The selection for the delta initialization of the data source is saved and the delta queue for the data source is generated in the source system. All the data that corresponds to the selection criteria determined in the info package is requested, similar to the full update. The steps generate delta queue and request data are reversed here compared to the usual way a delta process is initialized.
Due to the potentially large volume of data involved, you can initialize the delta process step by step. The selections for numerous initializations must not overlap. If you use a time-based selection when initializing the delta process, you should use an upper maximum time interval such as toDate of 12/31/9999. This avoids data records from the delta queue mistakenly not being transferred to SAP BW with future delta updates.
You can reduce the volume of data in the delta process initialization and thus reduce the processing time by transferring historical data beforehand by full update. Historical data in the source system is considered to be static because no further changes are made to it. A prerequisite is that the data extracted by the full update method must be static, so there can be no changes made to these data records at a later date. Additional tips are as follows. You can use several info packages with different selections to make the prior full update transfer in parallel. If you use a time-based selection when initializing the delta process, you should use an upper maximum time interval. such as a to date of 12/31/9999. This avoids data records from the delta queue mistakenly not being transferred to SAP BW with further delta updates.
A delta update requests only those data records that were created or changed or deleted since the last load for the data source in the source system. The delta queue is the central temporary storage location for these delta data records. The properties of the delta process for the data source determine how the delta data records arrive in the delta queue, that is, delta type, and how the changes are recorded, that is, record mode and serialization. Details about these aspects are provided under Properties of Delta Processes. The process flow is as follows. When you carry out a delta update, the initialization selection for the data source is used automatically. The new and changed data records are transferred from the delta queue to the SAP BW system.
If a data loading process or request fails and a red traffic light appears in the SAP BW monitor using transaction RSMO, the previous delta transfer is repeated. In this case, the delta for the same data source is requested in the source system again, and the source system resends the records from the delta queue. The process flow is as follows. A delta update fails. When the next delta update is executed, the user is informed that the delta update is repeated when the info package is executed, and this occurs automatically with background processing. A data request for update mode R is sent to the source system. The new and changed data records are transferred from the delta queue to the BI system again.
The delta process is a property of the data source that indicates how data is transferred. As an attribute of the data source, it indicates how the data in the data source will be transferred to the data target. For example, this enables you to derive the data targets for which a data source is suitable, determine how to update them, and how the serialization has been done. This information is required when modeling a data flow as well as for managing the SAP Business Warehouse or BW system.
The procedure for the delta process is as follows. Determine the delta process for the data source in the table ROO SOURCE in the source system, or in the table RSO LTP SOURCE in SAP BW for data sources 3.x, or in the table RSDS in SAP BW for data sources respectively. Determine the properties of the delta process in the table RODELTAM in SAP BW or in the source system. The table RODELTAM defines the following properties of the delta process for a data source. Delta type, which will be explained in detail later. Record modes in the delta process, which will be explained in detail later. Serialization. The serialization field RODELTAM DREQSER describes to what extent the sequence of individual data records within a Delta process reflects the origin of these data records in the application. Serialization is necessary in overwriting data targets, data store object or DSO, to enter changes to data records in the correct sequence.
The possible characteristic values of serialization are as follows. No serialization takes place. Serialization is required between requests. The data packages within a request do not need to be serialized. Serialization is required at data package level.
The procedure for the Delta process is as follows. Determine the
possible characteristic values of serialization are as follows. No serialization takes place. Serialization is required between requests. The data packages within a request do not need to be serialized. Serialization is required at data package level. The data packages in a request must also be serialized. For example, this is necessary if an extractor can only supply after images. C record modes and several records with the same key can be sent within a request. The Delta type field RODELTAM DELTATYPE is a property of a Delta process. It describes how the Delta is staged within a Delta process. Two of the most important characteristic values that are only used in conjunction with SAP source systems are illustrated in the figure. The following characteristic values are possible.
The record mode concept deals with the question of how changes to data records are recorded in the Delta process. This is exemplified in the figure. In this example, the record mode answers the question of how the
following characteristic
data records are recorded in the Delta process. This is exemplified in the figure. In this example, the record mode answers the question of how the data source sends data when the quantity in an order has been changed from 10 to 8. You will also learn how the SAP BW system recognizes the types of records transferred. The figure illustrates how the order is changed. First, the quantity is changed from 10 to 8 and then the order is fully deleted. It is clear that on creating the order, a new data record is generated when it is saved. It is not clear how the change in the quantity from 10 to 8 is documented. There are three options for the data that is transferred to the SAP BW system and how these changes are documented. They are illustrated in the middle of the figure. When the order is deleted in the source system, the SAP BW system can be informed about this in several ways. It can be informed that the record is to be deleted, or it can receive a record with inverse values. The record mode now describes the type of change that a data record contains. The difference between the various Delta processes is that each supports only a subset of the 7 possible characteristic values. If a data source implements a Delta process that uses several characteristic values, the field ROCANCEL in which the record mode is saved is automatically part of the data source. Data source is assigned to the info object 0 RECORD MODE in the SAP BW system.
The characteristic values are as follows.
The figure describes the connection between the record mode and the possible update to data targets for transaction data. In an info cube, only the additive update option is possible. Data records with the same characteristic value are cumulated but not overwritten. Determine the update type for each key figure in the transformation rules for a DSO. It is possible to update a key figure in add or overwrite mode with reference to the DSO key. Note the following dependencies when using data sources capable of providing delta figures in the modeling of a data flow. If the data source sends both the before image and the after image, this combination can be loaded to any info cube or DSO. If the overwrite data setting was made for DSOs, only the after image, that is the last image, arrives in the activation queue table of the DSO. If settings are made in the DSO to add data, both the before and after image are necessary to load the data correctly to the target. If the data that fills the SAP BW system is an additive image, the data can be written to an info cube or a DSO. However, with the DSO, the update type for key figures must be set to add and not overwrite. If the data source only sends the after image, this must first be updated to the DSO that is in overwrite mode. Reverse images can be processed by all targets. Deleting images can only be processed by a DSO. Info cubes cannot process deletions. The figure shows a comparison of two different BI content data sources that have different delta processes. They are only similar in their use of serialization. Both delta processes provide the data records in the same sequence in which they were created in the source system. A comparison of the delta processes is as follows. Data source 2LIS_02_ITM, that is, purchasing data item level, has the delta process ABR with delta type D, that is, push. Because this is delta type push, the delta data records from the application are posted to the delta queue before they are extracted from the delta queue as part of a delta update. If the data sources are from the leading object or LO cockpit, this push takes place either with direct delta, that is directly from the application V1 updating, or with queue delta, that is from the application to the extraction queue V1, and from there to the delta queue with the collective run. The data source continues to provide after, before, and reverse images. For this reason, you can use both info cubes and data store objects or DSOs as info providers with no restrictions. Data source 0FI_GL_4, that is general ledger line items via delta extraction, has the delta process AIE with delta type E, that is pull. Because this is a delta type pull, the delta data records are determined during the delta update by the data source extractor, updated to the delta queue and passed on to SAP BW directly from there. The data source only returns the after images. Direct updating into info cubes is not possible for this BI content data source. First, a DSO in the data flow must be addressed that updates key figures with the update type override to the update rules.
With delta processes using generic data sources, the data is transferred into SAP BW with the delta queue in the following ways. With delta type additive delta, the record to be loaded only returns the respective changes to key figures for key figures that can be aggregated. The extracted data is added in SAP BW. Data sources with this delta type can supply DSOs and info cubes with data. With delta type additive delta, the record to be loaded only returns the respective changes to key figures for key figures that can be aggregated. The extracted data is added in SAP BW. With delta type new status for changed records, each of the records to be loaded returns the new status for all key figures and characteristics. The values in SAP BW are overwritten. Data sources with this delta type can write the data to DSOs and master data tables.
If necessary, you can also integrate a delta process with a generic data source. However, to do this, certain prerequisites need to be fulfilled. There must be a way of identifying the data records that have already been transferred to determine the delta.
If a field exists in the extraction structure of a data source that contains values that increase monotonously over time, you can define delta capability for this data source. If this type of delta relevant field is present in the extraction structure, for example in a timestamp, the volume of data transferred in delta mode is determined by comparing the maximum value transferred during the last load with the data that has accrued since. Only the data that is new is transferred. To determine the delta, generic delta management converts the update mode into a selection criterion. The selections for the request are expanded by one interval for the delta relevant field. The lower limit of the interval is known from the last extraction. The upper limit is determined by the current value, for example, the timestamp at the time of extraction. You can use safety intervals to ensure that all the data is included in the extractions. After the data request has transferred to the extractor and the data extracted, the extractor informs generic delta management that the pointer can be set to the upper limit of the previously returned interval. This section gives an overview of safety interval limits.
With delta processes using flat files, the data is not transferred to SAP BW using the delta queue. Instead, it is loaded directly from the data source to the PSA. The delta process set in the transfer rule for this flat file data source must be notified of the underlying data and its delta properties. For example, the data target for the flat file data source in SAP BW is a DSO that has the info object document number as the only key. The process is as follows. First, the following data record is loaded into the DSO of SAP BW with a flat file data source by initializing the data process. Document number 4711, material M01, quantity 12, unit of measure ST piece. Then the following change record is transferred to SAP BW as part of a delta process for the same flat file data source. Document number 4711, material M01, quantity 15, unit of measure ST. Depending on the delta process of the flat file data source, the following image results in the DSO after updating this delta record. FIL0, delta via flat file with after images. Document number 4711, material M01, quantity 15, unit of measure ST. FIL0, delta via flat file with additive images. Document number 4711, material M01, quantity 27, unit of measure ST.